Thanks. All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us bright and early here at the Myrtle Beach Convention Center and online at collegeweeklive.com. My name is Steve Frappier. I'm Director of College Counseling at Ransom Everglades School in Miami, and co-presenting today with me, one of my associates, Claudia Jolivet. We're here to talk about a concept and a policy that we've been having at Ransom regarding application control. And we'll define all of that, get into it a bit more, but something that's been in place. I've been director at Ransom for 8 years, and this has been in place starting since my second year, about how to get students to thoughtfully consider their lists, apply economically and strategically to a range of schools, not feeling the need to apply just because or to pull too many triggers regarding applications. One of the part of what informs our work also, and my two associates and I, formerly having worked in college admissions, myself at my alma mater at Washington University in St. Louis, Claudia at Georgetown University, our third associate who's here at Carleton, Reed, and Conn College. So a lot of it is from the other side of the desk, and also in serving a pretty mobile population, highly multicultural, highly mobile, and thinking about the U.S. and the world in terms of four-year college enrollment. At the same time, I think it's important when we're thinking about application control, we're not defining it in the sense that for counselors that are looking at a student and saying, too quickly, oh, you're not material for X and Y. You're not made for going to X or Y school. And actually, those are comments that both Claudia and I heard in our respective guidance offices, having been both first-generation college attending students. We're not intending application control to be that controlling, but we're trying to get students to think about ways that they don't necessarily need to apply to the whole universe, and what are ways that we can go about accomplishing that. I will turn it over to Claudia to kind of frame the next hour or so we have with you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Claudia Jolivet, and I've been in the Office of College Counseling at Ransom Everglades School for 6 years now. I was flattered when Steve asked me a few years ago to work with them putting together this presentation on application control, and it's certainly been a lot of fun taking our show on the road, and certainly being here today with College Week Live on this webcast. So, without further ado, we'll just get started. You're looking at this lava lamp, and you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with application control? And yes, I will say that it will be a pretty groovy presentation here today, but Steve will get to the lava lamp charts in just a bit. I am going to begin first with addressing the why and the when of application control. We work with the students, and year in and year out, they have these fears. And we want to engage them and have conversations as we strive to counsel them in the college admissions process. And so today I will address the concerns and the conversations, and later on Steve will elaborate a little bit more on the data and the methods that we have incorporated. I do want us to begin by acknowledging that clearly not all caseloads are created equally, and without a doubt our experience as counselors at an independent school is quite different than those of you that may be working at public schools or with community-based organizations. But we hope that some of the observations that we have here today and some of the potential efficiencies that we will describe throughout this presentation will be helpful. And we certainly believe that they are applicable to offices of all sizes. So with that, I begin with this caption. And in true Miami fashion, it is in English and in poorly translated Spanish. And for those of you that can't read it or see it, it says, well, I'll tell you what it is, basically. So this is a caption that Steve captured at a grocery store. And for those of you that are ice cream lovers, you can relate to this. You arrive at the ice cream case and you open the refrigerators, and there's so many great choices, and you don't really know what to choose, what to go for. And so we could relate to the students' experience in the college search process, in the college building list process, where you have so many great choices and you can't really make up your mind which one's the right one for you for that particular day. What flavor would you choose? You're so overwhelmed by everything that's out there that you go for the Frosty Paws because you see it and it's there and it's right at hand and you feel like, well, I may want to even try it, not knowing that Frosty Paws are not for human consumption, right? And so that kind of just captures the experience that we're elaborating on here today. This idea that the choices available out there are so many and so varied, but sometimes students will make the mistake and just go for that Frosty Paws, and you want to tell them, no, that's not for you. That's not the right, not for your consumption, indeed. So just to get students thinking about, it's ultimately what this experience is that so many great choices, but yet not all of the choices are for you. And so mindful of that, we found this to be pretty relevant and funny. So why application control, right? We've reached a point where there is certainly the need to rein in our students and help them control their impulses, right? They have this impulse, and without a doubt, it's certainly easier to have that impulse at the 11th hour with the click of a mouse. But our job as counselors is really becoming more and more of a balancing act. We're juggling these different needs that are in front of us, right? The needs of the student, without a doubt, they want to have choices. They want to have affordable options. And we want to be able to offer that to them. We're also want to respect the parents' needs, but at the same time, we have our own obligations as counselors. I represent an institution, and as so, I want to know that my high school is truly believed to be one where we're not just about getting students in. We respect the idea that we're not just keeping track of where students get in, but more importantly, where are students enrolling. Ultimately, what matters the most is the yield. Where will students attend? We gain nothing from having an excessive number of students getting into different places. We certainly celebrate the ability to have students match and enroll at an institution that is the right place for them. And so that's our particular need that we need to be mindful. As we establish relationships with our counterparts on the other side of the table, we want to have them respect the fact that they know that when we are encouraging students to apply to those institutions, there is certainly the ability and the potential that those students are going to enroll and they will yield at that particular institution. And then last but not least, we are certainly dealing with the data and the conversations that are taking place in the marketplace. And we are all familiar with those conversations. We get it, we understand, and certainly our students do so as well. And we want to help manage that conversation. We want to support them as they try to interpret that data that oftentimes is blown out of proportion, right? We want them to know that yes, every year the perception is that colleges are becoming more and more selective, and it's becoming a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So they're more selective, so I need to apply to more schools, so more applications are going out. It just kind of becomes this ball that is rolling out of control, and there's data out there that can help us guide students to understand that yes, there's the means to apply to all these schools, but truthfully, even though this data from 2010 and 2012 may seem outdated, it's still relevant and true today. Less than 30% of students applying to college, of seniors applying to college, are applying to more than 7 schools. So this idea that more is better isn't always the case, right? And so what are some of the challenges that and so I want to bring up a particular example. I was telling Steve earlier that it reminded me of this conversation about application control. When you're talking to a student and you're trying to get to know the student, you know better because of the conversations that you've had with the student about what truly is applicable and relevant to that student. And I have a particular case in mind. I once worked with a student that had been a very successful student athlete at Ransom Everglades, and the student felt that it was really important to to be a student athlete in college. He felt that participating in sports and the support he received from his teammates and his coaches was so significant in his high school experience that he knew that he wanted to have that in college. It wasn't about playing, for the top level teams. It was about having that experience. But as the conversations ensued, the parents began to consider all these different institutions that would have never given him that kind of experience that he had wanted all along. And so as we discuss what it is that we do and why we need to have application control, it's because sometimes students know what is right for them, but they can get lost in the conversations and with time about the places that are truly going to offer them the opportunities and the experiences that they really want. And so we acknowledge some of the challenges that we've had. Without a doubt, the Common Application has been fantastic, and we wanted it and we needed it, without a doubt. And regardless of your views about the Common Application, we can definitely say that it's been a great, great tool for our students. But the simplicity, clearly, the relative simplicity of the Common Application is certainly troublesome at times. And as I said, it's even harder on December 31st when you're not really having a conversation with the student, but that student is in front of a computer and a mouse click away from just submitting another application. So that's certainly a challenge that we can acknowledge. We're also acknowledging from our particular experience that students are really looking for the need to have more safe financial safeties. And so sometimes our conversation is they need to apply to more schools because they need to know they're going to have affordable options. And without a doubt, the wide range of financial aid packages that are available in the marketplace makes it really hard for students to know if there's really going to be a consistent affordability within different schools, or if there's going to be a wide range of choices given the variety of financial aid packages that can be offered. So sometimes that becomes a challenge that we need to keep in mind. We also realize that ultimately, in our particular case, in our independent school, without a doubt the greatest challenge, and I can definitely relate to many, many stories, is this idea of students submitting applications based on their perceived hooks, right? Or they believe that auditions, portfolios, essays, their resumes are really what are going to give them that niche, that opportunity. So why not apply? Why not apply when, I may have a chance at getting in with these particular hooks? And so I have a particular instance. I was working with a family, and as a former admissions reader for the Office of Undergraduate Admissions at Georgetown, I'd been through that process, and I had a student that walked into my office one day and said, well, my parents have a close relationship with Marco Rubio. And I thought, okay, university located in Washington, D.C., Marco Rubio is a senator in Washington, D.C., and the connection is what? The perception was, he's a senator, he's in Congress, he's in Washington, D.C., I want to go to Georgetown, it's 2 and 2, you do the math. And it was just surprising, right? The idea, once again, that they have these perceived connections and they feel that it might just work out, let me go for it, right? Let me give it a try. So we definitely struggle with that idea, and it's one that we work closely with students to elaborate, and we want to have more information besides this just I perceived notion that it'll work out in the long term. And yes, we all have stories of students that have obviously been admitted with being outliers and not truly being in the standard profile, academic profile of students being admitted to those institutions, but more and more students really believe that they have that connection. And so what do we do, right? What is it that we do on our end? Well, we believe there's the need to have conversations. And these conversations need to take place, sooner rather than later if you're going to be able to manage the madness, right? You can't take care of this at the end of the spectrum when it's really truly time to apply. You need to start managing it early on. And in our case, we really truly benefit. Once again, our caseload allows for us to really get to know our students. And so what I do want to highlight, though, is that this is not an instance, this is not an aspect that is recurring, right? We don't have an extensive number of students that are going out of their way to apply to an excessive number of schools. This is not the case. We have a few, and ultimately it's those few that get us thinking about, okay, how do we manage you? How do we support you and stop you from going crazy in your applications? So if you're here today, you can really perhaps relate, those of you that have worked with students in the counseling process, to this idea that you want to just tell the student, stop. You don't need the frosty paws. Like, I know you have anxieties and I know you have fears, but you cannot go for that because that is not for you, right? And as much as we want to sit back and watch them eat the frosty paws and be like, okay, I told you so, right? That's not really our job, right? As counselors, we want, and as educators, we want them to know in advance that that through the conversations we're having with them, they should be listening to us. And so we believe that the conversations you have early on with the students helps them kind of follow your lead later on. And so we start by telling them that the truth is that this is not just a lottery, right? The admissions world there's more of a science to it than just a chance, right? This perception that, well, if 8% are getting in, then I'm one of 12, I have a chance of getting in. We all know that the chances of getting in are not the same for everyone. And that's the conversation that we're trying to have with our students early on. We need to let them know that there's a difference, right? There's really truly a difference in the chances of students attaining admission. And we need to start sharing with them data. And in doing so, sharing data with students later on, you want to be able to do so because you've built that comfort level with the student, right? And so you want to be able to have an honest conversation with students later on and tell them, listen, when the weatherman says there's a 90% chance of rain, do you just grab your bathing suit and go to the beach just because you think it's just not going to rain on you? Those chances are not for you, they're for someone else, but they're not for you, right? That's not necessarily the case. But some students will believe that about it. They're like, oh, no, it's not going to rain on me. It'll rain on someone else, but not on me. So data is really helpful, and that's how we believe that having these conversations with students early on, but then engaging them with specifics about what truly their particular chances are going to be will become much more relevant. And so our goal is to provide students with that data. Even though many of their students want to believe that this process is a lottery and that everyone has a chance, the reality is that we know that's not the case. So the sooner we start using historical data, the easier it will be for us to limit the applications per student. And how do we do so? Well, we begin having conversations with our students early on in their junior year. At Ransom, we engage students in the college counseling process in their second semester of their junior year. But we realize that we have the benefit of having that face-to-face time with our students, and that may not be the case with all of you. And we do want to acknowledge that the access to some of these items on this toolbox are there for most of you. We take the time to ask our students to fill out questionnaires where they share information about their particular interest. It's pretty simple. We posted a questionnaire on Naviance, and we just have the students fill it out. We post a questionnaire for parents. We ask parents for feedback. We ask them to tell us anecdotes and stories about their students, ways that we can really truly get to know the student in advance, right? The reality is that when you're going to have the heart-to-heart conversation in the senior year, you want to be able to know that you've gotten to know that student along the way. And so we take advantage of reading and reviewing some of the comments that are written by teachers throughout the years. We also we'll take the time to really track the student's resume and their visibility on campus just to get to know that student. So we make use of all of these items on this toolkit and really allowing us to not only help ourselves in preparing students for their interviews and their essay writing experiences and perhaps their college visiting days, but certainly preparing ourselves for that heart-to-heart conversation that you will eventually have with them later on in their senior year. So it's these conversations that allow for us to ultimately have the heart-to-heart feeling conversations with the students in their senior year. And as a result, when that time finally arrives and you're going to have that more subjective conversation with the student and go over that reality check, right? This is finally the time, here we are, would need to narrow down a list. What are the conversations you're going to have with the student? Yes, you're going to be talking about data that you've collected at the high school level, data that's available in the marketplace. But more importantly, you're going to be able to engage that student and tell that student, okay, so here you are. If you're applying to all these schools, can you truly afford to pay, the cost of applying, submitting the application, paying for the test scores, right? Has that crossed your mind? Can you even think about the possibility of how long it's going to take and the time you're going to have to invest in writing these essays for these schools, for all of these schools, right? Something else to think about. They're just thinking, I'm building a list and it's going to be okay, it's going to work out, but they're not perhaps thinking about the details of what it's going to take to get there. How about the interviews? Do you really see yourself being able to prepare for the interviews, right? And I know that in my personal experience, I often interview for my alma mater. I will interview for Georgetown, and I will know when a student is not prepared for the interview, right? They've come with very vague answers. They have very limited knowledge. They don't really know enough about it, but that school was on their list. So they've applied to that school. It's something to think about. Will they have the ability to prepare for that interview? And then what about this notion of, as a 17 and 18-year-old, how do you handle rejection? Are you prepared to handle rejection? And we very well know that decisions do not roll out in any particular order, right? They don't really get a good news before they get bad news. It could just be all a collection of bad news in a very short period of time. And that's what we tell the students. Are you prepared to handle that? And how is that, what kind of a toll will that take on you, right? And so it's this ability to have these very important connections with the students early on, right? That will enable us to take it to the next level and allow for us to really start doing very, very detailed one-on-one, okay, now the data is coming, and how is this going to be applicable to you? And so with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Steve as he kind of walks us through some of the more important chart building experiences.
Thanks, Claudia. Another thing we do, as much as is electronic, we require a paper transcript request, a little archaic. But on the transcript request, we have students list 3 unique reasons why they're applying to that school. So if it's just location, sports, has my major, it's like, well, what is your major? What sports are we talking about? And that often causes students, if they can't cross that hurdle, how can they have a half-hour interview? And things of that nature, that it can't just be just because. We're looking for more buy-in from the student because every application that's submitted should be a place that the student could see themselves matriculating at. And that's one of the first thresholds. And we'll deny initially, we're not going to send this out yet. You need to prove to us that you know a little bit more about that institution. And we get the eye roll, and then they come back and they're a little bit more engaged, right? But also discussion about data, right? So if anything, regardless of the setup, whether or not you're a school that has an ambiance, there's abilities for conversations. All of us on the high school side, we have that structure. But data, I think, is the next level. And I'm going to go over various levels of quantitative data that we use at Ransom in conjunction with these close conversations. And one is something that not unique, not a term I came up with, but I think of it as backwards mapping, where you start from the result and trace things back to the origin. You try to imagine what if we did this in reverse. And I think more and more, these are numbers that we don't really care about in the admissions, in the college counseling office, even though that the media's focus is very much on these and talking about application volume and overall admit rate. There was a couple sentences in one recent national publication about how Princeton's admit rate increased by 0.0 something percent. Who cares about the 100th place of an admit rate? That doesn't really help on the ground level in working with students and families face to face. Middle 50% ranges are not especially helpful. I think we have to help them as consumers though. They look at that band and go, well, I'm in the middle of that band, or I'm at the upper quartile of that band, I'm golden, and it's not, or this, and we all work with exceptions and students that are not guaranteed in the top quartile, students that are still admitted even in the bottom for a variety of reasons. Rankings lists, limited they're helpful to a certain degree, but they're not something to overly invest in. Record lows and record highs. We're kind of getting over that. I think if there's one numbers thing I think to take away from the session today is really a better encouragement of thinking of how big is the airplane that the student is trying to fly on. Are they applying to a school that's essentially the jumbo jet or the 1 and 2 seater, right? Because the name on the sweatshirt is the same to a lot of them. But envisioning what is the population of that particular place? How big is the airplane we're wanting to fly on? What are the attributes and demographics as well, the past freshman class that the college has published and is celebrating? If it's in print 1 year, a college will want to sustain or improve on those particular metrics in the following years. They're confident that they could match and improve upon that. And I think that's something that is worth noting. I pick on Amherst sometimes. A lot of students, they're fascinated by, there are no Division III liberal arts colleges in the state of Florida. So sometimes there's that kind of intrigue in schools of that flavor, which I completely understand. But like, you have to realize that Amherst is this little plane that you might have to help spin the propeller on, and half of them are already executive platinum, So by attempting to want to fly on that airplane, they are, even though the admit rate may look very similar to other schools that you're applying to, the actual population for that, the seats are limited. And that's the number one guiding factor for every university, is the number of freshmen that could be in the freshman dorms. Not anything else but that. That's the driving force of every single institution. So start with that number, and then work backwards with students from there. Pretty much, they're all going to be gender balanced. So divide that freshman population by 2, and then how do you imagine yourself piecing, fitting into that puzzle, right? Fitting into that community from there. Small print here, but these are the things that we're seeing on when we're looking at colleges' websites and the profiles that we get or the email updates from colleges, beyond male-female ratio, the multicultural percentages, geographic distribution. Space is filled if a school offers early decision. There's often a percentage on space filled, but the math can be done to then go, what are the remaining spaces regular, right? Using the executive platinum analogy, right? What percentage is already there? And then thinking of, okay, if my student's applying regular, what's the competition like for that subset? And I think that's another layer that, and surprise, colleges don't really report their regular decision admit rate, right? They report their early decision admit rate and their total admit rate, but a lot of math has to be done to try to figure out if it's an early decision offering school, how competitive and maybe how disparate the early admission rate is compared to the regular admit rate. Number of freshmen per academic subdivision. I think we've all encountered this within our own state systems, within private institutions that have what we call different toll booth lanes. Name on sweatshirt's one thing, but you enter the toll booth plaza as an applicant. In Cornell, you have to pick one of 7 toll booth lanes. And sure, there may be a student of a lower profile, quote unquote. It's amazing how they know with certainty everyone's profile, right? Applying to a different academic subdivision. Well, then they're not actually in direct competition, right? At a lot of these schools, universities, where there's a different dean that is admitting students for that particular subdivision. And I think that's just something to point out, knowing how different schools may be operating. There's certain schools where choice of major doesn't matter, certain schools where it does. And that's where the selective admissions can kind of really work its way through. For example, MIT puts on their website only 15% of freshmen come from independent day schools, whereas other schools it may be 30 to 40%. That's just something in their community building, something that can be pointed out. What you take the percentage, apply it to the number of freshmen. That's how many students like you could potentially be in that freshman class. And it helps when the decisions may not come out their way in the end. Well, they were only looking for that amount, for that particular cabin within the plane that they're flying. Legacy ratio, increasingly, we're noticing there's an approximation being sought between the percentage of the class that's legacy, often defined as parent or grandparent, and the percentage that is first-generation college attending. But if the students are of neither bucket, 15% on either end, then there's a competition for the space in between there. Quantity of varsity sports teams, I think that's something that also matters. Students they go, well, yeah, the athletes get in, but they're also part of the freshman counts in the class and the middle 50% ranges, and I'm sure there's a broad range of testing, but at a lot of these schools. But an example is, we know that, I don't know with certainty, but my hunch is Stanford's football team isn't averaging a 1500 SAT, right? So the non-athletes may have to be carrying a little bit more of the weight in order for the middle 50% ranges to perhaps balance that out. Just one quick case here, and I call this kaleidoscoping, where you're just kind of taking the image in front of you and doing minor tweaks, right? That, in a case from a couple years ago, we've done this a couple of times, it's already dated 2010, but it's still relevant that, working with an Asian American female, applying regular decision to the Arts and Sciences Division of Columbia University. That's already a particular point. If you're early or not early, if it's a school that is engineering and arts and sciences, there's kind of those quadrants. And so here's a student who's in the regular decision quadrant of the Arts and Sciences Division. And then it was published, well, 43% of the class was early, 15% from the South, a quarter of the population enrolled is Asian American, 49% female. And students go, oh, that's great, it's diverse. But then have you actually merged all those numbers together to find out how many students there are like you? And then if there's about 1,100 freshmen total and 43% filled early, how many spots are left regular? And then applying all the numbers through, not that there are these strict quotas, right? But just in terms of approximating and being able to point out, perhaps the limited space, and it came down to about 11 or 12 enrolled students of that demographic. And I kind of told her, I'm not quite sure you're the 11th or 12th most talented Asian American girl here, let alone in the Southeast U.S. Do you apply? And we'll help you apply. Go for it, prep for the interview. Just know that this is even though you're getting all that mail, this is kind of how many seats are ultimately left at the end. If you're applying all those percentages and trying to approximate from a published university profile from the year prior, these are great data points that can be helpful with students. And sometimes I don't even have it off the top of my head. Let's sit down and figure this out together. And they love that side by side, that it's not just, from the top of my head. We can actually work it out and we can arrive at a number together. It's more of a show than just us telling, and it can be worked on. Another set are common data sets for colleges that publish this. And this is an initiative that's been out there for a couple decades. And a lot of colleges archive these through their Office of Institutional Research, the IR office. And these are not available everywhere, but universally, though, in Section C, these are really cold-looking reports. And they're 40-some pages, a big PDF. They'll slow your computer down, maybe. But Section C is the admission section. And usually it's like 4 to 6 pages, showing from the year prior things that they even show how many boys applied, how many girls applied. You can figure out if there's a gender difference, in terms of admit rate. Where a college might say, oh, we're about equal, but then you kind of run the numbers and go, the percentages look a little different. A case in point, Emory, without an engineering school or a football team, they're a little bit more female heavy in their applicant pool, but magically gender balanced when it comes to enrollment, and that's something that can be figured out and maybe surmised a bit, but it can reveal some of those interesting differences. Are they more ACT prevalent or SAT prevalent? And they even have the percentage of freshmen that have used which tests. It's pretty interesting, and that can be put in a binder or on a website for those that are there, or can just be archived and pulled when needed as a quick scroll through. And a lot of this, so kind of the origin, to get to that lava lamp that we had alluded to, um, there was a point a couple years ago, there was a student that said, and came to me with this list, and she had already charted this out. This was her list, and she had described it as her safeties, her likelies, her possibles with 4 S's, 5 S's, and a question mark. And again, this is kind of that, maybe the 1 to 5% of certain students, right? But can we save them from themselves in this point? And she said, it's already October. It was a student with a divorce situation. Dad's willing to pay for this or not that. Mom's like, go ahead and apply. Maybe he'll come around. And she just said, it'll be easier for me to apply to these 20-something schools than to convince my parents otherwise. And as Claudia alluded to, having talked with a student about stress levels and how she's able to balance herself and aspirations and all the things she had signed up for, something clicked, and I'm like, I don't know if you can do that as well as you think that you can, now at October 10th or so. And an A- student, great rigor, great young person, no particular demographic hooks, 32 ACT, 2 below 700 subject tests, which we call standard strong. It's beautiful for many institutions, most institutions, my goodness, right? But for this particular list, we call that standard strong, right? And so how do we advise from here? And I said, well, the first thing, Wharton is a subdivision of Penn. So that was my first clue, that you can't apply to both. So you had to, she was just grabbing names. It was very clear, and everything from Scotland to, I even said, okay, well, which USC are we talking about, right? South Carolina or LA, now that it's clear that you have multiple continents that you're aiming for. Harvard and maybe MIT. All right, okay, so, and then being a Naviance using school, I realized that there's ultimate additional usages then for prescribing and actually making an additional chart from this. And if you're not a Naviance school, or because Naviance doesn't have medium high or medium low, it's like they're ordering meat, that they talk to them about interest levels. Oh, medium-ish, medium plus, and you can do this on a sheet of paper where you can then, but the trick that I recommend is have students take their list, however long it is, whether it's 7 or 50 schools, and just write down whether they're low or medium or top choice, medium, low, before you as a counselor prescribe chances if you're able to, using all the data points that we've talked about, your historical data from your high school, your just sense as a college counseling professional, and have the student prescribe his or her interests first. Because a lot of times they go, well, it's low interest because it's my safety. How many times have we heard that? There's this sliding scale of, well, but it's such a great fit for you, but I'm not that interested because I can get into it. The moment that you use the word safety or target or likely, a lot of students then become a little less enchanted, right? And many students, not all, right? And then this is also with the Naviance and putting it in. Instead of far reach, though, I call it unlikely, right? And then sometimes I make another little chart there and call it Powerball. And then I put it on a sheet of paper, make photocopies. But what we're able to do, and this is part of the magic of it, because we don't know what's going to happen. Once students put this in, the chart that we made for the student, a lot of interesting things were signaled. Once she put out there, and I've color-coded it to kind of walk through it, very commonly using that phenomenon of, I'm not interested in schools I can get into, right? There's often a high correlation of, you're not going to find a lot of top choice and safety. I usually doodle in this box here, I draw a sunshine or something. But what we're able to do this, how many of us work with students that go, well, I need more safeties? But I think we all know within our own regions what are going to be safeties for admission or safeties that are potential merit offers, and that's what I tagged for her list with Miami and UF, which then released her mentally, perhaps from even applying to the lower interest safeties. Prioritize even within each category. How many safeties does one need? Only apply to those particular schools that are of higher interest. And then, so that's kind of the purple box. Let's look at the safeties and likelies, but then only pick among those. The middle column of possibles, invest in those schools that are of higher interest, not necessarily the schools that are low interest. The bottom right-hand corner, we recommend removing altogether. Why go through the motions of low interest unlikelies at $100 a pop once you do SAT, ACT? Can you look the interviewers in the eye and actually say that you want to be there? That was pretty telling. And the relief is amazing when we can just draw an X through these and go, thank goodness, you know, that I don't have to apply to those. And then up here, this is a little more difficult in, you know, because even with early decision, oftentimes we have found that assuming a regular decision process, applying early decision if offered might move it up one box, right? Some schools it might move it up two, but for a lot of these schools it doesn't shift. It shifts a little bit, of course. We know there's a certain benefit with early decision, but not, you know, it doesn't move them from there to there as much as they want it to, right? From unlikely to safe. So what happened here was like, let's look at, so oftentimes if there's an early decision choice, well, let's look at these. The starred ones were the ones that she had applied to, that eventually kept on her list. There were 8 schools she was interested in, plus 2 others that were financially safe. What happened, she applied to Penn Arts and Sciences, was deferred, and then we took a good look at the other schools that were in this list, and knowing that, you know, not even 10% of defers are eventually admitted. Let's look at schools that offered early decision too. She applied early to Vanderbilt, and that's where she's a senior now, right? And then being able to kind of alleviate, you know, a couple $1,000s and a lot of the anguish of having to go through all of that. Is it perfect? Does it work all the time? No. Is it a helpful takeaway? It is, and it's just keep a file for the office, because in April when parents say, well, we were never told this, you know, you put a date on it. Actually, we made this drawing, you know, I told your student to hang it on the fridge, look at the drawing we made in school today, you know, and it's, and then we're able to, if students retest, if there's significant changes, it's called a lava lamp because students' interests go up and down. Like, oh, I broke up with that guy. It's off my list now, right? You know, we all hear that, you know, or they're not as good in football as I thought, you know, done, you know, or however. So that's why it's a lava lamp, because the bubbles can move around, and so that's the part of what's neat about it. We do feel that for this particular set of schools, a lot of the medium and ultra selectives, that anticipating non-admission actually might be becoming easier, as it's becoming clearer that if you have a student who is not, you know, a non-elite athlete, you know, and the role of a great essay for research universities. I can't say as much for liberal arts colleges, but for the research universities, those aspects seem to be mattering less. Even though it's in the admission spiels about holistic admissions, we're able to kind of anticipate unlikely a little sooner. And then discussing these observations, perhaps proving or anticipating how we arrived at the conclusions, can maybe help to envision results and help with April conversations that we're all having now. And then, but 8 applications can get it done. We want students to feel I had at least 2 great choices. I left myself room for interest that developed throughout senior year. We all have students that are dead set on a particular major at the start of the year, but maybe it's cooled off a bit by the time they actually get through AP Physics. You know, have they been able to figure it out there? I didn't hear a lot of no and maybe, and you helped me to challenge myself. I think these are all aspects that we value in students entering this process. For students that do apply to more than 10 at our school, we surcharge them an annoyance fee of $25 an application per school number 11 and afterward. And that money goes into a travel grant fund for our financial aid students who have never been to a college before. And so we're able to then use money from those overage fees to then book plane tickets for members of our own community to see colleges in April that they've been admitted to. So those are some of our methods. Thank you. We're happy to go over questions as you have them. Have Claudia join us. Yes. Yes. Sure. Yeah. Naviance is a subscription program through a company called Hobsons, and it's a database that can send out transcripts as well as keep multi-year data on all your students and their admissions results. And the counselor has to enter the decisions, but it's a great way to save it within a database. And it's kind of a college tracking system for that.
And is that through your district or is it through all high schools or just your high school?
Yeah, individual high schools purchase it. Some entire districts, if they're public, can have also purchased them depending on the region of the country. So that could be something to bring up at the district level or with administrators at your school.
And you
Because
have estimated fee
yeah.
Here.
Okay, here. Oh, great.
They're here.
Yeah. So
They're in the hall.
yeah, I would chat with them. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, we had a colleague, she worked with us for many years and left to work at a charter school in Boston. And the one item when she arrived at her new school and was talking to her head of school was, this is an amazing tool. It really helps to keep data. And my hat goes off to those of you that have been in the counseling world pre-Naviance, because there's no doubt that it simplifies the collection of data and the observation of data, for extended periods of time. So worth considering.
The blue and the green. Yeah.
So we're in a school in the South, which means most of the original college lists are SEC,
Yes.
just like straight
Oh,
up.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
what are your strategies for when a student comes to you with a list of like 10 and they're all the same school? What are your processes for encouraging them to kind of expand their mind and look elsewhere?
That's great. I think, and part of it too, it's, is it, they could be perfectly fine with that. That this is what I wanted, and if they're able to describe why, I think that, and the parents are saying, yeah, this is great. And the parents say we actually aren't particularly interested in them having a 2-plane ride, elsewhere in a long drive. But there's something where you're able to maybe point out, oh, kids that apply to X school might actually be very interested in these others outside of that athletic conference, or maybe in the same state, but with a different sort of format. And then they might go, oh, that's neat. I'm going to keep to this list. At least that's what they say. And then, but it's amazing the number of students that come back. You were talking to me about that one school. What was that again? And then they may apply eventually by January. But part of it is, and I like emailing that out. If there's time. Granted, caseloads are so different, right? But to be able to say, just to mention, these are schools. If you're ever bored and want to Google a couple, I think these could be of interest if you're also interested in these. Yeah, Jameson.
Yes, just wondering, we're a day in boarding school, and so we have a significant international population. And I'm not sure if you guys work with international students, and if so, what do you do to partner with the international consultants that do push 40 schools, for each student?
It's a great question. It's interesting, as mobile and as international as our students are. They've all almost always been green carded. We don't have the same TOEFL taking necessary international population. And part of the pushback I have is for a lot of international consultants and independent consultants domestically, they want their own data as well. So if they don't get their clients to apply to 20 or 40 schools, then they don't have data to use for the next clients. And so I kind of say, are you willing and complicit to then just hand them over all of that, even though it's out of your pocket? And then some of them also with, just anecdotally chatting with other counselors that have worked with international students, if they need financial aid, here are the schools that you're kind of automatically denied for needing it, and then those should be pursued.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. I love the idea of data and the tracking based on metrics. But what do you do when you don't have this data accessible by some colleges who the students list as their top choice? So where do you go from there?
Yeah, and each college kind of keeps data in so many different ways. I think even if anything, just helping them envision the freshman class. And whether or not it's as sophisticated as the early versus regular admission rate, going, okay, if it's 2,000 freshmen, 1,000 boys or girls, depending on who you're working with, and then trying to at least figure out, okay, which subdivision are you applying to, and how many spaces is that, that can be helpful in just, you know, then it breaks it down a little bit more into the sub-communities. And whether or not there's an actual admission rate that you know for those, it gets them thinking, okay, that's the size or the shape that I'm thinking of.
Hi, Steve.
Hi.
I know you don't like the lottery analogy, as you indicated, and that's probably appropriate for the standard strong student that you described. But I find that, you know, for my very best students, the very best, top of top, I speak of selective admissions as a lottery. I say, you know, you have earned a ticket, you know,
Yes.
to be considered seriously at, take your pick, Harvard, MIT.
Yeah.
And I think that helps to kind of, you know, rein in their expectations a little bit. You know, I tell them, look, if Harvard gets 30,000 applications, 25,000 of those are qualified.
Yes.
You know, so it comes down to, you know, geographic concerns and cultural. So, you know, I think in some cases, for my top students, that's a good approach. I don't know how, if you comment on that.
Yes, I agree. I agree. By all means, we definitely feel the same way about telling students you've earned the right to consider that institution without a doubt. I feel like where we want to bring this and hone it in is for those students that are not necessarily, have not earned that right technically. And yet they feel that they have something that's going to allow for them to stand out. And so they still want to go for it and think, well, why not, right? If 30,000 are applying, one more, one less, what difference does it make? And so that is where we take this conversation into consideration, is that there's really, what you offer is really not going to allow for you to stand out. And so to perceive it as, why not put my name, you know, in the bucket is what we have to talk about.
Salmon? Yeah. Oh, we'll do it. Okay.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. I found it fascinating. What I'm finding is that a lot of the pressure to apply to more and more schools comes from parents, obviously, not the student. And it's the parent, I'm finding, who's saying, well, we're just going to, we are just going to apply,
Yes.
obviously, to see if we can get in.
Yes.
Do you have a magic wand that soothes that?
What I appeal to for the potential feather collector, let's say, is, do you have a younger sibling who may also be interested in applying to that school? And I provide an anecdote, and this was how I personally operated, but I remember students participating, a lot of demonstrated interest. They did pen pals with me, you know, and having worked in admissions, and then it got to April 1, students admitted, they don't even write back. May 1 comes around, they didn't even decline the offer. And I realized, oh, they just played the game really well. And then 2 years later, when a younger sibling applied, regular decision, not early, and I got the same type of love notes and all, I'm like, I already know how that family operates. I'm automatically not as in love, you know, in seeing this particular family again. And we appeal to that, you know, that there are different admissions offices. Some of them are more goldfish-like. They don't have memory even if they've met you 3-4 times, right? But appealing to that, be thoughtful. Can you handle potentially the shade thrown your way for getting into 10 schools when everyone knew that you were actually always going to go to that particular school? And some students realize, you know what, I'm not going to endure that with my peers in April and May. And there's some students that say, I don't care, I want it all. But we at least have to point out to them that there's other maybe social consequences for when it's very clear cut. Not to cut off opportunities, right? But when it's clear cut that they're going to be getting it. Appeal to younger siblings and maybe the social pressure.
My question is about early applications. We hear a lot from college counselors, admission counselors that say, get your applications in early is best. Do you provide a deadline for your students? Like, this is the deadline, we want everything done?
We do and we don't. I mean, obviously we want to encourage them to get it done as early as possible, but we feel that our counseling really should take us to, if it's, you know, as close to the deadline as need be, we will be there for that student to really make that decision. And so
In the college, I mean, we do know of institutions that ultimately really set up really early deadlines. I guess just the way we work in our office and the dynamic we have allows for us to really be able to carry on those conversations later on and not feel the need to really set up. But we try to avoid going into the break, right? What we truly be mindful is avoiding having the student having to make these decisions when there's no one there to really counsel them, so that if we ultimately go on break in December before the deadlines in the January timeline, we hope that they have had and we've engaged with them enough in advance so that they know that this is how we feel about those additional schools on their list, and for them to consider that when the deadlines come around in January.
It's finally time because some students have fall testing. So I understand the nature of some schools that we need everything by October 1, but if they haven't even taken an SAT that fall, the list may not be the same list in late October once those results come in. They may be able to let go of some certain schools, or maybe they add a couple. So we kind of try to appeal to them, give us 10 days notice. But then come winter break, you know, anything you do over break we'll process when we're back, but we're not coming in.
Hi, Steve.
Hi.
How do you help to cultivate administrative support for your office, particularly if your upper school head or director or your head of school changes?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because there's so many different structures where there's certain offices where it's guidance and college counseling together, or does college counseling report to the upper school director or to the head of school? We're fortunate we're at a school where our former head of school used to be a college counselor and a former admissions officer back in her time. So she kind of fully supports a lot of these nuances. She knows it's not our phone call that punches a kid through, things of that nature. And but I think it's having enough team meetings to then talk about what are the expectations of our office. And I recommend those starting the school year. Whether or not you're part of that, I want to. What are the messages that are expected from us to our community and cross administration? Because a lot of times some schools, the perception is, well, college counseling is the office. It's the tail wagging the dog, right? But in order to kind of make it more of a we're all working together on behalf of students, gathering them a bit more and try to feel out from heads of school or whomever who understands the nature of all the reps coming in and all the juggling that happens ahead of college applications and processing the decisions with the families.
So we do have a question from our online audience.
Yeah.
The first question, how do you balance your role as student advocate with the responsibility as a college counselor and ethics within admissions? I can see parents not being happy with the advice to limit applications if they have the means to pay for them. Since we don't work for the colleges, I guess my question is, how do we explain why it's important to not apply to schools they really aren't interested in ultimately immatriculating to?
That's a great question. I think Claudia alluded to this too. I think long term about the reputation of the school. We're in it longer than the one cycle that we're there for with the seniors. But thinking of, we don't want to be known as the yield buster. We don't want to be known as the school that celebrates, 8 kids got in, but nobody went for multiple years. That doesn't make us particularly proud. And at a certain point, it can happen where it can catch up, with that particular school, or if that rep changes schools. We have anecdotes of this. So we care about in terms of the perception of the institution in the long term. Even though the parents are like, I don't care about the long term, I care about my kid now, right? Which is why, okay, if you must do 13 applications, then contribute to the travel grant budget of the office. So we never say, okay, we will not send more. It's never that absolute, but it's one where we really appeal to the fact that it can be done in 10 or fewer.
Any other questions?
Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for College Week Live. This was fantastic. Appreciate it.